They shoved my wife against our own fence. But they did not check who I was. That was their first and last mistake. If you believe no one should ever feel unsafe in their own home, subscribe now, because what happened next shook the entire neighborhood and left the HOA running for cover. It was supposed to be just another quiet Saturday morning. I had spent 20 years serving my country, protecting strangers in the most dangerous places on earth. I retired to protect my family. My wife, Emily, loved this little suburban neighborhood when we moved in last year. The streets were clean. The lake sparkled. Families walked their dogs every evening. It looked perfect, peaceful. But peace is just the calm before a storm you do not see coming. That morning, Emily went out to water the flower bed by our mailbox. It was her routine. Roses, marigolds, a little American flag she had placed there last Memorial Day. She had barely started when two men approached her. They wore polo shirts and smug grins. One of them held a clipboard. The other had a phone out, already recording like they were planning something. I recognized them instantly, Marcus and Todd, the self-appointed compliance officers of the HOA. They had harassed nearly every homeowner in the community for petty violations. Trash cans placed an inch too far out, lawn grass too tall by half an inch. And now, apparently, my wife's flower bed was their latest crime scene. I watched from the window as they started pointing at the flag and the rose trellis. Emily tried to explain it was all within guidelines. They kept closing in, talking over her. Todd stepped too close, grabbing the trellis and snapping it in half. When Emily gasped and tried to stop him, Marcus shoved her back, hard enough that she stumbled into the fence, clutching her side in shock. That was when the calm inside me ended. They did not know who they had just touched. They did not know what line they had crossed, and they had no idea what I was about to do. I opened the door so hard it slammed against the wall. The sound froze them both. Todd lowered his phone. Marcus turned, still wearing that smug look, but it faded the moment he saw me. Not just because of my size or the military bearing that never leaves a man. It was the look in my eyes. The kind of look you only get from someone who has stood face to face with real danger and survived. "Step away from my wife," I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to slice through their arrogance. Marcus raised his hands like he was the victim. "She attacked us first. She is violating HOA policy. That flag and those plants are unauthorized." Emily tried to speak, but I gestured for her to stay back. "Are you seriously telling me you assaulted my wife over a flower bed?" Todd cleared his throat, trying to regain the confidence he had just lost. "We have the right to enforce compliance. If you have a problem, take it up with the board." "You just crossed from enforcement to assault," I replied. "And now this is no longer an HOA matter. This is a criminal matter." Their faces drained of color. Bullies often fold when someone stronger stands up. Emily clutched my arm, still shaken but safe now. Neighbors had started gathering at the edge of their driveways, whispering, watching. Phones were out. For once, the recording devices were not on the side of the bullies. I pulled out my own phone and called the police. Two men just physically assaulted my wife on private property. We have witnesses. Todd took a step back. "There's no need to involve the police. Let us just—" "Too late," I said. But what they did not know, and what even the watching neighbors did not know, was that I had more than just the law on my side. I had training, discipline, and a plan for handling bullies who thought authority gave them permission to abuse others. This battle had only begun. The police arrived within minutes. 2 patrol cars pulling up, lights flashing but sirens off. Officers stepped out, calm but alert. Already scanning the scene, I knew the look. They were sizing up everyone, deciding who was the threat. I stepped forward, identifying myself clearly. "My name is David Cole, retired Navy SEAL. This is my wife, Emily. These two men assaulted her. Marcus and Todd tried to speak over me, but the lead officer raised his hand. One at a time. Emily showed the deep red mark already forming on her arm. One of the officers took her aside gently to get her statement. The other questioned the two men. But the real power came from the crowd now gathering. Neighbors, people who had stayed silent under HOA pressure for months, started speaking up. I saw them push her. They broke her flowers and shoved her. They have done this before, always threatening people. The officers listened carefully. Todd's face was turning pale. Marcus kept glancing around like he was searching for a way out. Then the officer asked a simple question. Do you have body cam footage or any official authorization for this kind of enforcement? They froze. No, the officer continued. Then you are not enforcement officers, you are residents. And you just admitted to putting your hands on someone else's spouse. Marcus stammered. We were following HOA protocol. Protocol does not allow assault. The officer replied sharply. They placed both men in handcuffs, but while the bullies were led to the patrol cars, I noticed something else. A woman stood near the crowd, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Madison Gray, the president of the HOA board. She had not spoken yet, but her expression said enough. This was not just about two rogue enforcers. This was bigger, organized, controlled, and I knew then that Marcus and Todd were just the tip of a much larger problem. I turned to the officer. I will be pressing full charges, and this is just the beginning. Madison's gaze met mine across the yard. She was not afraid that she was angry, and that told me everything. The next morning, an official-looking envelope appeared on my doorstep. No return address, just a clean white paper folded inside. It was a notice from the HOA board. Cease and desist. Unauthorized use of decorative items and inappropriate conduct toward HOA representatives. They were not apologizing. They were doubling down. It accused Emily of violating HOA landscaping rules, accused me of threatening behavior, demanded we remove the flowers, the flag, and even threatened daily fines until compliance was met. At the bottom, in small print, it warned that failure to obey could result in lien placement against our property. I held the paper in my hand, feeling the rage rise, but not panic, because this was exactly how bullies operate. They do not stop. When you push back, they escalate. They count on fear to make you surrender. What they did not know was that fear was something I had learned to master long ago. I called my lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Clara Jennings who specialized in property rights and HOA abuse. She answered on the second ring. Clara, it has started. She sighed like she had heard this story before. Let me guess. They assaulted your wife. Now they are trying to flip the script and paint you as the problem. Exactly. Good. That means they are scared. And scared people make mistakes. We arranged to meet that afternoon. But as I hung up, Emily came into the room, pale and quiet. She held her phone out to me. They posted something on the neighborhood app. She said, It was a message from Madison Gray. We regret the misunderstanding yesterday. However, disruptive and aggressive behavior will not be tolerated. For the safety of our community, enforcement actions will continue as necessary. They were not just targeting us. They were declaring war, and they still had no idea who they had provoked. Not just a man, not just a homeowner, but someone who had led missions in war zones, negotiated with generals and protected lives under fire. Fight for my wife's safety and our home had just gone from a local dispute to a full-scale battle, and this time, I would not be fighting alone. By evening, word had spread faster than wildfire, not because of social media, not because of viral gossip, but because neighbors were finally talking, the kind of real, face-to-face conversations HOA bullies hated most. Mrs. Langford, an elderly widow 2 doors down, knocked first. She held a faded photograph in her trembling hands. Her late husband, standing proudly beside their flagpole. "They fined me for flying that after he passed," she whispered. "Said it was a hazard. I paid because I was afraid." Then came Mark and Jenna, a young couple new to the neighborhood. "They threatened to revoke our parking permit because of a stroller left on the sidewalk," Mark said bitterly. Jenna added, "And when we tried to appeal, Madison told us to remember who runs this community." One by one, the stories poured in. Fines, harassment, people shamed into silence, elderly veterans told to remove their yard signs, single mothers cited for minor landscaping violations. And behind every punishment, a pattern. The fines seemed to always hit those who spoke up or those whom Madison Gray considered outsiders. I listened. I took notes. My military training taught me the importance of intelligence before action. You do not charge into battle blind. You gather facts. You build a team. By nightfall, a dozen families had gathered in my living room, some fearful, some angry, all ready to stand together. Clara, my lawyer, arrived carrying a thick binder labeled HOA abuse case studies. She spread out documents across the table. "If we work together," she began, "we can file a formal grievance. But that is only step one. We can also gather evidence for a civil suit." I could see hope flickering in their eyes, but also doubt. Years of living under HOA threats had taught them that standing up usually made things worse. "I know you are scared," I said, my voice steady. "But fear is what they are counting on. Fear is their greatest weapon. And I can promise you this. In my career, I faced enemies with far more power and far fewer morals than Madison Gray. And we won." Emily took my hand, squeezing it gently. "And we will win again." For the first time, the room filled not with fear, but resolve. But what none of us knew then was that Madison already sensed a storm coming. And she had plans of her own. Plans that would not just threaten our homes, but our lives. At sunrise, before most had even woken, official-looking notices were taped to the doors of every family who had gathered at my house the night before. The same cold, calculated language. Notice of violation. Failure to comply with HOA behavioral guidelines. Pending fines. Every single household, one by one. Punishment, swift and deliberate. Emily found ours first. She held the paper in shaking hands. "They are trying to divide us. Scare everyone back into silence." It was not just about money anymore. Madison was sending a message. "Stand with us, and you will suffer." By noon, 2 families backed out. They were polite but firm. They had kids, jobs. They could not risk losing their homes. I understood. Fear does not just control, it isolates. But 7 families stood firm. 7 was enough. Then came the next blow. Clara called me. Her voice was tight. "David, it is worse than we thought." I pulled the HOA's financial records and land agreements. She paused. "Madison and 2 board members are not just enforcing rules. They are profiting." She had found undocumented fines, rerouted through a fake maintenance company owned by a relative of Madison. The money was not going back into the neighborhood. It was being siphoned off. Thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands over the years. "And it gets darker," Clara added. "The HOA filed pre-lien notices on several properties. They are planning to seize homes, force sales. Your name is on the list." They were not just trying to control us. They were trying to take everything. And still, they underestimated me. I spent years navigating complex missions overseas, dealing with warlords and corrupt officials who used fear like a currency. Madison Gray? She was using the same playbook. But I knew how to flip it. That night, I gathered the remaining families again. Clara spread the evidence out across the dining table. Fraud, misuse of funds, illegal property seizure attempts. Every piece of paper a nail in Madison's coffin. We have enough to take this to court, Clara confirmed. But it will not be easy. They will fight like cornered animals. I stood, steady and clear. Let them fight. But this time, they are not facing frightened homeowners. They are facing a Navy SEAL and a united community. For the first time, the fear had shifted, not on us, but on them, and just like that, the tide began to turn. The following morning, Clara filed the lawsuit. Fraud, harassment, illegal fines, assault, attempted property theft, a full civil case with criminal referrals attached. The papers were served to Madison Gray and the HOA board by official process servers, not quietly but in broad daylight, right in front of the community center where Madison held her weekly meetings. The moment the papers were handed over, a ripple went through the neighborhood. Doors cracked open, curtains shifted. People saw it happen. The board tried to stay composed, but you could see it, the shock, the fear. But just as quickly as the lawsuit gained momentum, so did Madison's retaliation. That night, Clara's office was broken into. Files were rifled through. Nothing major taken, but it was a clear warning. Back off. And then, the intimidation escalated. An anonymous letter was slipped into my mailbox. No return address. No signature. You are making a mistake. For your family's safety, withdraw the lawsuit. Accidents happen. I read it twice. Then calmly placed it into a plastic evidence bag. Whoever had sent it thought fear would paralyze me. But fear does not work on men who have dodged mortar and extracted hostages. I gathered the remaining homeowners at my place again. Clara showed up with 2 off-duty sheriff's deputies who agreed to keep watch at night. Not as a favor, but because both had family members who had also been harassed by HOA boards in other communities. That evening, Madison made her boldest move yet. She called an emergency HOA meeting and invited all residents. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. Control the narrative before the truth spread further. Paint me and my wife as dangerous radicals trying to destabilize the community. The night of the meeting, I walked in alongside Clara and 4 other families. The community hall was packed. Madison stood at the front, flanked by the remaining board members. Her usual confident smile looked forced now, tight, desperate. Before she could speak, Clara leaned over to me and whispered, "She knows she is cornered. Be ready for anything." I nodded, because Madison's power was built on fear and secrecy. And tonight, both were about to collapse. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Madison cleared her throat and launched into her speech. Carefully scripted and coded in concern. There has been a lot of misinformation spreading recently. Certain residents, she paused, eyes locking on me, have decided to bring a lawsuit against this board. They claim harassment and fraud. But what they are really doing is threatening the harmony and order of our beautiful neighborhood. Few heads nodded, but more faces looked uncertain. Some frowned. Others exchanged glances. The old fear was starting to crack. She continued, "We have always acted in the community's best interest. Rules exist for a reason. Without them, there is chaos." That was her pitch. Fear of chaos. Fear of what might happen without her control. I raised my hand. Clara nodded at me. The moment was mine. "Madison," I said calmly, "you speak of order, but order does not mean abuse. It does not mean targeting the elderly for flagpoles. It does not mean forcing single mothers to pay hundreds for having a stroller on a sidewalk. And it certainly does not mean assaulting my wife over flowers." The room shifted. More heads nodded now, some quietly, some firmly. I lifted the folder Clara had prepared. "We have records. Proof of fraudulent fines. Proof of financial theft. Proof that this board has preyed on residents for profit, not protection." I placed the anonymous threat letter on the table. "And now threats against my family's safety." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Madison's face tightened. That letter could have come from anyone. You cannot prove before she could finish. Mrs. Langford stood up, her frail voice cutting through the noise. We do not need more proof. We have lived this. I was fined for flying my husband's flag. So were others. We paid because we were scared. Then Mark from next door rose. They tried to take our home. One by one, people stood. Voices once silent, now strong. Jenna, the elderly couple from down the street, a disabled veteran, a young father, each told their story. Each exposed the same pattern. And then, from the back of the room, a figure stepped forward. It was Officer Ramirez, the same deputy who had responded when my wife was assaulted. In case there is any doubt, he said, holding up a badge, the sheriff's department has opened an investigation into the HOA board, starting tonight. The room erupted, not in chaos but in hope. Madison's final defense had shattered, but the battle was not over. Yet, because power like hers does not vanish quietly. It fights. And it fights dirty. The very next morning, Clara called me early. Her voice was tight, sharper than usual. David, you need to come to my office, now. I arrived within 15 minutes. She already had the documents spread out on her desk. Not court papers, not fine notices. Something worse. The HOA board filed an emergency motion late last night. They are trying to place an injunction on all properties involved in the lawsuit, she said. If it is granted, it freezes any sale or legal action, including stopping our case from moving forward. I scanned the paperwork. Madison had acted. Fast, too fast. This was not just desperation. It was strategy. She was trying to strangle us in bureaucracy, make it impossible to fight back financially until people caved or settled. But there was more. They also filed a restraining order against you, Clara added, claiming you are inciting violence. Against the board, Emily gasped. But you have not. I know, Clara said. But they are hoping the court will buy their version long enough to stall us. Madison was playing the final card of every cornered bully, weaponizing the system itself. Most people would fold under this kind of pressure. That was the board's gamble, but I was not most people. I leaned over the table. Can we counter this? Clara smiled faintly, already working on it. But we need to move fast. And we need every family to stay firm. I nodded and stood. Then we will not just respond, we will escalate. That afternoon, I gathered the remaining families again. Some looked weary. Some looked angry. But no one had quit. Not this time. We knew this would not be easy, I told them. But they are scared. That is why they are trying to bury us in paperwork. But paperwork is not power. We are. Then Clara revealed the news that lifted the room. I have filed a countersuit, she announced. Not just for harassment and fraud, but for racketeering. If the court agrees, it will not just be civil damages, it will be criminal. A ripple of shock and satisfaction rolled through the room. We were no longer defending ourselves. We were taking the fight to them. But just as the energy surged, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message. You should stop. You cannot protect them all. My instincts sharpened. This was no longer just about property. No longer just about legal games. Madison's allies, whoever they were, had crossed a new line, and I was ready for them. I showed Clara the text. She took one look, then grabbed her phone and called Officer Ramirez. We need this traced. Immediately. While she spoke, I stared at the message again. The words were not just a threat. They were a reminder. Bullies escalate when they are exposed. First fines. Then intimidation. Now personal threats. It was textbook. The kind of tactic I had seen corrupt officials and warlords use overseas. Silence the leader to break the group, but they had forgotten. Something I had faced far worse in far darker places. And I had never backed down. Ramirez arrived 20 minutes later with a technician from the sheriff's cyber unit. They began tracing the number. It took only minutes. The phone was registered to a shell company. And that company was linked to Madison's husband. Clara looked up from the report, eyes wide. David, this is bigger than just Madison and her board. The shell company owns the fake landscaping service the HOA has been funneling fines through. The same company that filed those liens. My blood ran cold. So the whole operation is a front. Clara nodded grimly. Yes, they have. Been stealing from residents for years. And anyone who got too close, anyone who asked too many questions was fined, threatened, or pushed out. Just then, the cyber tech spoke up. And there is more. We cross-referenced the security cameras from your street. He pulled up footage. Someone tried to tamper with your property line markers last night. The video showed a shadowy figure in a hoodie attempting to move the boundary stakes that defined my lot. If they succeeded, they could have claimed I had encroached on HOA-controlled land, fabricated violations, property theft by deception. This was no longer just about Madison protecting power. This was a criminal enterprise. I looked at Clara. Is this enough to take to the district attorney? She smiled for the first time in days. It is more than enough, Ramirez added. I will take this to the DA tonight. But be ready. When they realize the charges are going criminal, they may not just stop at threats. I nodded. I am ready. Because when you expose criminals, they often fight like cornered animals. But what they did not know, what they could never understand, was that I had trained my entire life to fight back, and I was just getting started. By the next morning, the sheriff's office had launched a full criminal investigation. Deputies served subpoenas at the HOA office and Madison's home before sunrise. No warning, no chance for cover-ups. Computers were seized, files taken, phones confiscated. The quiet suburban streets of Willow Pines turned into the front line of a legal storm no one could have imagined just weeks before. Watched from my driveway as deputies carried out boxes of evidence. Madison stood on her porch, arms crossed, trying to look defiant, but her face told a different story. Not the calm, calculated woman who once ruled this neighborhood through fear. No, this was a person watching the walls of her empire collapse. Neighbors. Gathered in small clusters, whispering. Eyes wide, some still scared. But most now filled with something stronger than fear. Hope. Clara arrived shortly after, holding a fresh folder. The district attorney is moving fast. They are filing charges. Today, fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit extortion. She paused, flipping open the folder to reveal copies of the official charges. And assault, she added, looking at Emily, for what those men did to you. Emily squeezed my hand, tears glistening but her spine straight. Then Clara gave me the final piece of news. And David. The judge approved our motion to dissolve the HOA's authority, pending the outcome of the case. I stared at her, barely believing it. You mean? She nodded. As of now, they have no legal power to fine, threaten, or act in any official capacity. A cheer rippled through the small crowd of neighbors, but even as relief washed over me, I stayed alert. Years of military service had taught me an important truth. The most dangerous moment is not the battle itself. It is the moment when the enemy realizes they have nothing left to lose, and I could see it in Madison's eyes. She was not done. Not yet. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, an emergency notice was slipped under every door in the neighborhood. A last desperate move from Madison. It read, urgent community action required. Unauthorized legal actions threaten our property values. An emergency vote will be held tomorrow to reinstate HOA leadership and dissolve all legal claims. Attendance mandatory. It was a final bluff, a scare tactic. She was trying to convince the community that without her control, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. That without the HOA, property values would collapse. That without her rules, families would suffer. But this time, no one was buying it. By morning, a crowd gathered not for her vote, but to demand her resignation. More than 40 households stood together on the community lawn. Parents, veterans, retirees, young couples. People Madison had once silenced with fines and fear now stood shoulder to shoulder, unafraid. Madison arrived flanked by the few loyalists she had left. Her voice was steady but strained. This neighborhood needs order, rules. Without the HOA, it will fall apart. Mrs. Langford stepped forward. The same elderly widow Madison once fined for flying her husband's flag. She held that same flag, now waving gently in the morning breeze. "We had order before you made this about power," she said firmly. "We had community before you made it about control." The crowd murmured in agreement. Then Mark, the young father, added, "You protected nothing but your own profits." Even some of Madison's former supporters nodded. The tide had fully turned. Before Madison could speak again, 2 unmarked sheriff's vehicles pulled up. The district attorney herself stepped out, holding a court order. "This HOA's leadership is suspended indefinitely pending criminal proceedings," she announced. "Madison Gray, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation." The deputies moved in swiftly. Madison's last mask of control shattered. She tried to speak, to plead, but no one listened. Not this time. The crowd watched in silence as she was led away in handcuffs. The sun rose higher, casting light over the neighborhood, light that seemed brighter than it had in years. Emily reached for my hand. "It is over," I nodded. "No, this part is over. But now we rebuild. Because when tyranny falls, healing must begin." And we were ready. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt like a completely different place. The fences that once divided us, not the wooden ones, but the invisible walls of fear and silence, had fallen. People who had lived next to each other for years but barely spoke were now gathering in yards, sharing coffee, watching their children play without the constant shadow of fines and threats. But freedom brought new challenges. Without the HOAS control, questions arose. Who would manage common spaces? Who would handle road maintenance? Who would ensure safety and fairness moving forward? That was when Clara stepped in once again, but this time, not as a lawyer. She offered guidance to form a community council, not a governing board with power to punish, but a volunteer group focused on solutions, collaboration, and transparency. "We will not replace one form of power with another," she explained. At the first gathering, "This council will exist to serve, not control." I was nominated to chair the council, but I declined. "I will help, but leadership belongs to everyone now." Instead, Mrs. Langford was chosen as the honorary chair, a symbol of endurance, of dignity, of a community that had found its voice. As we worked together to rebuild trust and structure, something beautiful happened. The families who once feared retaliation now became leaders in positive change. Young parents organized community cleanups. Veterans volunteered for neighborhood watch. Even those who had once supported Madison out of fear or misunderstanding found new purpose in rebuilding the neighborhood they had nearly lost. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, Emily and I sat by the small flower bed she had once been attacked for tending. The marigolds had bloomed again, brighter, stronger. She smiled softly. "Do you think your military training prepared you for all of this?" I thought for a moment. "It prepared me to fight. But it was you and this community that taught me what we are fighting for." For the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet, not with fear, but with peace. But deep down, I knew this was not just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a new mission. Word of our victory did not stay within Willow Pines. Local reporters who had once ignored HOA complaints now covered our story with headlines like "Veteran Leads Neighborhood," Uprising against abusive HOA and community reclaims. Power after years of harassment. Soon, regional news picked it up. Then national outlets. People from across the country began reaching out. Emails, letters, phone calls. Some offering congratulations. Others asking for help. An elderly man from Arizona wrote, "They fined me thousands for planting a cactus in my own yard. No one would listen until I heard your story." A single mother from Florida shared, "Our HOA tried to seize my home over late fees. I thought I was alone. Your fight gave me courage." It became clear this was not just about willow pines. What had happened here was a symptom of a deeper issue across America. Homeowners bullied by the very organizations meant to protect them. So we decided to do something about it. Clara, Mrs. Langford, and I founded a non-profit, Homeowners for Freedom. Our mission was simple: protect, educate, empower. We created guides on homeowner rights, built a network of legal experts willing to help at reduced rates, established a hotline for people facing HOA harassment. What started as a neighborhood's defense became a nationwide movement. Held community town halls, first locally, then in nearby towns. People traveled hours just to share their stories, to find solidarity, to learn how to stand up, not with anger, but with courage and unity. But through all the media attention, all the interviews, I kept one thing clear. This is not about destroying HOAs, I told every reporter. It is about ending abuse, restoring respect, reminding those in power that they serve the people, not the other way around. And the more we spoke, the more people listened. Even lawmakers began to take notice. State representatives contacted Clara, asking for advice on drafting fairer HOA regulations. Change was happening. Real change, yet through it all, I stayed grounded. Because this fight had started not for fame or policy. It had started because two bullies thought they could push my wife around. And they learned, as many others would, that when good people stand together, no bully, no matter how powerful, can stand for long. Just as it seemed the tide had fully turned, a new threat emerged. An anonymous letter arrived at Clara's office. No signature, no return address. Just a single sentence typed in bold: "Stop before someone gets hurt." Clara showed me the letter without a word. We both understood what it meant. Madison's arrest had not ended everything. Some of her allies, those who had profited quietly in the shadows while she took the public heat, were still out there. And now, as the movement grew, they felt the walls closing in on them too. Within days, strange things began happening. Two families who had supported the lawsuit received code violation notices from a mysterious third-party inspector no one had hired. The community council's mailbox was vandalized. Someone slashed the tires of Mark's car in the middle of the night. Small acts, cowardly acts. But acts meant to send a message: we are watching. We will not go quietly. But the intimidation backfired. Instead of breaking the community's spirit, it strengthened it. At the next town hall meeting, more families stepped forward. Even those who had remained silent until now. A woman I had never spoken to before, quiet and reserved, stood up. "I was afraid," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "But I refuse to live in fear any longer. Not after what we have all endured. They may watch us, but we will watch each other." Applause filled the room. That night, Officer Ramirez and his deputies increased patrols. Volunteers organized nightly neighborhood watches, and Clara prepared additional legal filings for harassment and conspiracy. But I knew this would not end with just legal action. Power does not surrender because of court papers. It fights in the shadows when it loses the light. I gathered the core group at my home once again. They want us to scatter, to doubt each other, to wonder if standing up was worth it. Emily took my hand. But we know better. I looked around the room. Veterans, single parents, seniors, young couples. Ordinary people who had chosen not to be victims. They are not just fighting us anymore, I said. They are fighting every person in every neighborhood who believes. Home should mean safety, not fear. And for the first time since this began, I was not just reacting to threats. I was preparing for the final strike, because when bullies refuse to learn, sometimes they need a louder lesson. The next morning, Clara arrived at my door holding a fresh set of documents and a look of grim determination. "We found them," she said simply. She laid the papers on my dining table, names, transactions, emails, a trail of deceit that stretched far beyond Madison Gray. It led to a private management company, Everstone Property Solutions, quietly hired by the HOA years ago to streamline operations. On the surface, it handled landscaping, maintenance, and financial audits. In reality, it was a shell used to funnel illegal fines and fees straight into private accounts. Madison had been the face, the shield. But the real masterminds were the executives at Everstone. They have done this in at least 7 other neighborhoods across the state, Clara explained. Every time, the pattern is the same: inflate fines, scare residents, force foreclosures, then buy the properties cheap through 30 buyers. I leaned over the paperwork, my military instincts kicking in. This was not just corruption. This was an organized criminal operation, and it gets worse, Clara added. The attorney representing Everstone just filed paperwork claiming the HOA's legal authority should be reinstated, citing community instability and potential threats to property values. They are trying to push a judge to shut down our nonprofit and the lawsuit. A cold rage burned in my chest after everything we had exposed. After Madison had been arrested. After residents finally stood tall. They were still trying to silence us, but they had underestimated the will of a united community. I called an emergency meeting that evening at the community center. The room was packed, not just with our neighbors, but also with reporters, legal observers, and residents from other neighborhoods who had faced similar abuse. Clara took the floor first, explaining what we had discovered. The crowd listened in stunned silence as the scope of the scheme unfolded. Fear turned into anger. Anger into resolve. Then I spoke. They believe that by cutting off the head, they can still control the body. That by silencing Madison, they can hide the truth behind contracts and loopholes. But they forgot one thing. I paused, looking into the faces of people who had once feared speaking out. The body, this community, is awake now. And it will not sleep again. A wave of quiet applause rose, growing louder with every second. "We will take this to court," Clara announced. "And not just civil court. We are filing federal charges. Wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy." Officer Ramirez, who had stood quietly at the back, now stepped forward. "And I can confirm the State Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation into Everstone Property Solutions and all connected HOA boards." The dam had finally broken. The bullies in the shadows were about to face a light they could not escape. The very next day, federal agents arrived. No warning. No negotiation. Just swift, deliberate action. Plainclothes officers and agents from the State Attorney General's office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit served warrants at Everstone's corporate headquarters and at the homes of their top executives. Computers were seized, bank accounts frozen, records confiscated. Years of deception, carefully hidden behind legal jargon and corporate shields, were now fully exposed. Word spread like wildfire. Not just in Willow Pines, not just in our county, but across the state. Reporters scrambled for interviews. HOA watchdog groups released statements. Families from other victimized neighborhoods came forward, their own stories matching our nightmare almost detail for detail. But as the authorities closed in, so did the final counterpunch from those who had everything to lose. Clara's office received an official notice from a high-powered law firm representing Everstone and its affiliates. A countersuit, massive in scope. You are accused of defamation, inciting civil unrest, and interfering with lawful contracts. Damages sought, $12 million. It was not just about money. It was a tactical move designed to frighten us, drain our resources, and bully us into submission. A classic corporate warfare strategy. I gathered the community council that evening, every chair filled. Faces tense but resolved. They are not suing for damages, I told them. They are suing to break our will. Mrs. Langford raised her hand, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from age. Let them sue. They already took my husband's flag. They will not take my voice. The room erupted in applause. Clara stood next. The good news is, the federal case takes priority. Their countersuit may delay things, but it will not stop justice. Then she added, and I found something else. Everstone's countersuit is being funded by a private equity firm that owns interests in multiple HOA management companies across the country. They were not just fighting for Willow Pines. They were fighting to protect a billion-dollar machine. Weight of what we faced settled over the room. But no one wavered. I looked around. Veterans, parents, seniors, young couples. People who had once hidden behind curtains and hoped the bullies would leave them alone. Now they stood tall, ready, unbroken. They want us to believe this is too big to fight, I said. But no system, no matter how rich or powerful, can survive when good people stand united. Emily squeezed my hand, and with that, the final battle lines were drawn. The federal courthouse was packed, not just with lawyers and officials, not just with reporters, but with families, dozens from Willow Pines and beyond. People who had been silent victims of HOA bullying for years. Now they sat side by side, watching as the truth they had always known was finally given a voice in a court of law. Clara stood at the plaintiff's table, calm and commanding. I sat beside her, surrounded by the families who had fought alongside. You was through every threat, every fine, every act of intimidation. Across from us, the Everstone legal team looked like an army. 4 senior partners, assistants shuffling papers, and a lead attorney whose suit probably cost more than my first car. They carried the arrogance of people who had won so many battles. They believed they were untouchable. But today, they were not facing scared homeowners. They were facing the weight of the truth and the law. The judge, a no-nonsense woman known for her integrity, opened the session. This court will hear evidence on allegations of fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and abuse of authority by Everstone Property Solutions and their affiliated HOA boards. Clara rose first. She presented the trail of evidence. The fake fines, the fraudulent maintenance contracts, the shell companies, the intimidation tactics, the illegal liens. One by one, she introduced witnesses: Mrs. Langford, Mark and Jenna, even Officer Ramirez, who confirmed the local sheriff's findings. Then came the key moment. Clara introduced a whistleblower, a former Everstone employee who had resigned 2 years earlier and kept copies of internal memos, emails that openly discussed strategies for increasing homeowner fines, targeting residents who were likely to settle rather than fight, and ways to manipulate property values to force foreclosures. The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward. Are you stating that these policies were deliberate and designed to generate profit at the expense of homeowners' rights? The whistleblower nodded. Yes, Your Honor, and not just in Willow Pines, in multiple neighborhoods across the state. The Everstone lawyers tried to object. The judge silenced them with a glance. Clara continued, introducing financial experts who traced the money flow, millions siphoned through Everstone's web of fake vendors and real estate shell companies. By the time she finished, the Everstone legal team looked less like an army and more like a crumbling wall. Then it was our turn to speak. Emily stood. Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. They tried to take our dignity, our homes, our peace. But we would not be silent. Not then, not now. And no family should ever have to fear the place they call home. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. The Everstone team launched their defense, but it was weak. Deflections, denials, claims that local boards acted independently. But the paper trail and whistleblower testimony had already connected every dot when closing arguments ended. The judge took a long pause. Then she spoke. This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with full criminal prosecution. Furthermore, a temporary injunction is issued against Everstone and all related entities, freezing their assets and prohibiting further collection activities pending trial. The courtroom erupted in applause. Reporters scrambled for updates, but more importantly, the people cheered. The fight was not over, but the first, hardest victory had been won. And the bullies who thought they could silence a community were now facing a force they had never expected: justice. The courthouse steps were filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and a crowd that had grown larger than I ever imagined. But the faces that mattered most were not the ones holding microphones. They were the faces of my neighbors, people who had once lowered their eyes when HOA bullies walked by. Now they stood tall, arms linked, children by their sides, proud and unafraid. Emily stood beside me, her hand wrapped firmly in mine. We did it, she whispered. No, I said quietly, we started it. Because this fight had outgrown Willow Pines. Families from other states were already contacting Clara, asking for guidance. News outlets were reporting on similar cases popping up from Florida to California. Even lawmakers were paying attention. One senator's office had already reached out, wanting to discuss new legislation to protect homeowners from abusive HOA practices. And in Willow Pines, change was happening faster than anyone expected. The fraudulent fines were voided. All liens were canceled. Properties seized under false pretenses were being returned to their rightful owners. Volunteers formed committees, not to control, but to support. Veterans organized neighborhood watches. Retirees offered gardening assistance to elderly residents. Young couples started a community child care exchange. Mrs. Langford raised her husband's flag again. This time, with a ceremony attended by the entire neighborhood and the local fire department. But amid the celebrations, we stayed vigilant. Everstone's criminal trial was still months away. And while the company's assets were frozen, some of its senior leaders had gone silent, disappeared. Clara warned us to remain alert. People with power and money rarely go quietly, she said. So we kept building our defenses, not just legal ones, but social ones. Stronger community bonds, transparency, regular meetings, open communication, trust. The nonprofit, Homeowners for Freedom, officially opened its first state chapter. Volunteers answered daily calls from across the country. Lawyers joined the cause. Legislators requested testimonies. What had started as a fight to protect my wife's flowers had become a national movement. A movement born from courage, not anger. From unity, not revenge. And as the sun set over Willow Pines that evening, casting golden light across the homes we had all fought so hard to protect, I realized something profound. The strongest walls are not made of wood or stone. They are made of people, standing together. And hours would not fall again. Months passed. The seasons turned. And with them, so did the community. Winter brought cold mornings, but warm gatherings. Neighbors who once nodded silently now shared coffee, watched each other's children, and helped clear snow from driveways without being asked. The fear that had once gripped Willow Pines had melted away, replaced by something stronger, belonging. Then came the trial. The federal case against Everstone Property Solutions began in early spring. By then, investigators had gathered mountains of evidence, enough to fill an entire courtroom wall with charts, bank statements, emails, and witness testimonies from nearly a dozen neighborhoods across 3 states. I sat with Emily, Clara and Mrs. Langford in the front row. Behind us, a sea of families from Willow Pines and other communities who had found the courage to come forward. Everstone's lawyers tried to argue that any wrongdoing had been isolated incidents. Rogue employees, miscommunications, a few bad apples, but the jury saw what we had seen from the start: a system built to punish, a business model of intimidation, a deliberate scheme to steal homes, dignity, and peace from everyday people. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 days, guilty on all counts. The verdict was read aloud in a silent courtroom. The CEO of Everstone and several executives were convicted of fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. Sentences were long. Some would spend decades behind bars. Restitution was ordered to every affected family, not just in Willow Pines, but across all identified neighborhoods. The cheers outside the courthouse were not loud or wild. They were steady, solid, a chorus of relief and justice. Reporters swarmed for comments. But I kept it simple. This was never about defeating a company. It was about reminding the powerful that people will not stay silent forever, and when we stand together, we win. Back in Willow Pines, the community celebrated quietly. No big banners, no grand speeches, just a shared understanding. We had not only saved our homes, we had saved each other. That evening, I returned to the same flower bed where Emily had once been assaulted. The roses had bloomed again, vibrant and full. Emily placed a new small flag in the soil beside them, not because it was a symbol of defiance anymore, but because it was a symbol of victory. Mrs. Langford joined us, smiling softly. "Your fight saved all of us." I shook my head. "Our fight did." As the sun set, cast in gold and crimson across the neighborhood, I finally felt what I had not felt since retiring from service. Peace. Real peace. No fines. No fear. No bullies. In the shadows, just neighbors, families. A community rebuilt not by rules or fear, but by trust, courage, and unity. And I knew this was not just the end of a story, that it was the beginning of a new legacy.